It was a beautiful day, but sadly, I saw a lot of destruction on Sanibel when I came through. Even in nearby Punta Rasa, you can see that the vegetation was clearly wiped out from Hurricane Ian, which hit this area on September 28th, 2022, or about 5 months prior to me visiting Sanibel. When accessing the island, there's one way in and one way out for motor vehicles, which is the tolled Sanibel Causeway. The causeway saw major damage from Hurricane Ian, which made it difficult for emergency crews to access the island and help the people who stayed while the hurricane hit. The bridge portions of the causeway actually held up pretty well. Rather, it was the stretches of roadway along the sandbars in between the bridges that got washed out. With that said, construction crews were able to act fast, and the causeway was able to reopen within a couple of weeks in order to help jumpstart the debris removal process.
Yeah, the causeway was breached in 3 areas, all in where the causeway goes as spans. We call them the A, B, and C span. And there's land areas that people use for beach access and picnics, and it's beautiful. But those areas were washed away. And, they're dealing with that now on the bridge too, is how to restructure that so that does not have the possibility of occurring again. So there's no access to Sanibel, you're correct. Governor DeSantis did an amazing job of getting that bridge reopened in record time. Just kudos to him and his team and his leadership for that.
That was Mike Cluth, who's a homeowner on the island, and we'll be talking to him more throughout this video to hear more about his personal experiences and just what he knows from living through the recovery process on Sanibel. And speaking of that, he continues to talk about what it was like to access the island for the following months after Hurricane Ian.
Well, we had to have typically every year we get what we call a hurricane reentry pass in case there was a hurricane. And, this is the first time we've never had a way to get back on the island. But when they do an evacuation of either, Sanibel or whatever there's a bridge going to it and there's limited access, to prevent looting and preventing people from going over there because no one's left on the island, as it's evacuated. We have reentry passes. They check that pretty thoroughly. So for the first month or 2, you had to have a reentry pass to get on, and that was either through a resident or you were a contractor or someone working on utilities or whatever else. But Governor DeSantis, the rumor has it or the story has it is that they put out to bid because they were getting quotes back for like 6 months to a year before they have the bridge reopen. DeSantis called in bridge building companies from all over the country, and there's 3 different companies gave bids, and he hired all 3 of them and said, okay, you're this section, you're that section, you're that section, and you will camp out here. You will bring trailers here. You will not leave the site, and you're going to go 24/7, whatever it takes. You will open that bridge. And then what they predicted to be 6 months, they did in 11 days. So they went from 180 days to 11 days out of just an amazing show of leadership.
The 3 crews that worked on the causeway included Superior Construction, Moya Group, and the Florida Department of Transportation, or FDOT. The site was surveyed as soon as 2 days after the hurricane, and the state was on board with giving them everything that was needed to make Sanibel accessible by motor vehicle as quickly as possible. And it wasn't until the construction of the causeway was completed that they could start the next process, which was removing all of the debris off of the roadway, whether it was traffic lights or trees across the roadway or building debris. You had to do that, obviously, to be able to access all parts of the island in order to give all of the help and resources that were needed across the island. So we've made our way onto the island, and along with pretty much every building on the island seeing some sort of damage, the vegetation was also heavily damaged. One of the biggest draws to Sanibel is the island's ecosystem. But we can talk more about that later, as here I'm going to ask Mike about what it's been like the last couple of months and what it was like initially when he first saw the island after the hurricane. So how long was it after the hurricane that you guys were able to come by and see your property, and what was it like for you guys to see it?
So the hurricane was September 28th, and I was at work. I'm a dentist in Indiana. It was the first time in 34 years I actually just left work. I just said, I got to go, because the hurricane made the turn and was coming in. We waited until we saw satellite confirmation that our home was still intact. We then took our pontoon boat. I could see on the satellite that both of our boats were off of their docks and off the lifts, and they were across the bay in mangroves. But the house was intact. Some of the houses on our street burned down or were gone. We took our boat from our home up in Indiana, and it's a pontoon boat. We hauled that down on the 2nd of November, or 2nd of October, sorry. 1st or 2nd. We got out to the island. We launched the boat up in the Caloosahatchee River and boated across. Got to the house on the 2nd of October. Only access was onto Sanibel was by boat. They were saying they were disallowing people to come on, but they really were it was easy to access. The amount of destruction done on those, when we came through that first time, the amount of capsized boats and boats we saw that were sunk or up into the mangroves, we stopped counting. Coming down the river, across the way. I boated that Pine Island Sound thousands of times. We're boaters, and that's what we do all the time, fish and boat. Navigationally, I could not really. I got lost. All the intercoastal markers were gone or blown away. The floating ones were knocked over, and all the vegetation was gone. All the mangroves were brown. All the leaves were off. Things just looked different, and it was just a whole different thing. There were sandbars had moved, and it was like going to almost like a deserted island. So there was, when we got there, the National Guard was at the end of our street. They did an amazing job as well, but it was surreal.
This is the far eastern end of Sanibel Island, where the famed lighthouse is. Sanibel Island comes to a point at the far east end, so we're right by the shoreline of the Gulf. The worst damage on Sanibel was seen along Gulf Drive. There's East Gulf Drive, Middle Gulf Drive, and West Gulf Drive. All three streets, however, pretty much follow the same line in paralleling the Gulf shoreline as it spans the island. The street that we're on right now, however, is called Periwinkle Way, but it might as well be Gulf Drive because it parallels the Gulf shoreline as the island comes to a point at the far east end. Periwinkle Way then separates and heads north and gets away from the Gulf Coast, but where we are right now, we're really close to the Gulf shoreline, and you can see extensive damage at the far east end of the island here. Soon we're going to be heading down East Gulf Drive, and we'll see what the damage looked like there 5 months after Hurricane Ian. Really quick, as I'm going to be uploading a separate video to my second channel called Chris Harden's Travel Archives, where I'll upload all of the footage that I filmed on my trip to Sanibel. It'll be a really long video, over an hour to be exact, but if you're wanting to see as much of the island as possible, make sure to check out that video once it's uploaded, and I'll have a link for it down below. You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell for my second channel so that way you'll know once it's uploaded. I didn't drive down every single street necessarily on Sanibel, but I definitely got a good look at most of the island. So once again, check that out if you are wanting to see more footage of the island. Well, moving on now, Florida is the fastest growing state in the country. There's a lot of reasons why people want to move here, whether it's retirement, cheap cost of living in the form of low property taxes and no state income tax, living near beaches, theme parks, or the abundance of golf courses, or maybe it's just the water recreation opportunities along with the year-round sunshine and warm weather. As many as 300,000 people moved to Florida from the time span of April 2020 to April 2021. With all of the people moving in, most of Florida's shoreline on both the Gulf side and the Atlantic side has been overdeveloped, and everything has become overcrowded from the Tampa Bay area to Sarasota to Orlando to Daytona Beach to Jacksonville to Miami, even Fort Myers right outside of Sanibel, you name it. Most beach communities in Florida have towering hotels and condominiums for miles on end. Sanibel, however, is a different feel, and it's a nice change of scenery. The buildings here have a height limit, and there can only be so many residential units per acre, and that's what makes visiting Sanibel Island popular, as the beaches and the rest of the island has more of a natural feel to it than most other places in Florida do. Another reason why people like my wife like to visit Sanibel is because you can find some of the best seashells on the Sanibel beaches out of anywhere in not only Florida, but in the entire country. Well, here is more of Mike's experience with Hurricane Ian.
We actually, and I just got back from a workout playing pickleball, but we moved over. We've been on Sanibel since middle of January until last week. We took the boat that we hauled down from Indianapolis and we went over to the other coast to Vero Beach just to get a change of scenery. And we rented a house over here, and just from talking to some of the locals over here, everybody's, I mean, the minute you say you're a refugee from Sanibel or you're over here from Sanibel, they're very heartfelt apologies of saying, I'm so sorry, because Floridians know that it could be them next time. And then after talking to some of the people on this area, that of all the hurricanes that they can recount that have came up through the Atlantic side, and as you just said, we worry about hurricanes in Florida and along the coastal areas. There's wildfires, there's tornadoes, there's mudslides, depending on where you live within the country or the world. There's always some natural disaster that can befall you. And ours just had to be hurricanes. And this one was just one that, probably people say, 1 in 100 years, one this bad comes through.
The last time that a major hurricane hit Sanibel was back in 2004, that hurricane being Hurricane Charlie. It was the strongest hurricane ever to hit Southwest Florida until Hurricane Ian came through 18 years later in 2022. Charlie was a Category 4 hurricane that had winds of up to 150 miles per hour. However, Sanibel was fortunate enough to not see the worst of Charlie as the eye of the storm first struck the island of Cayo Costa, which is about 15 miles north of Sanibel. Hurricane Charlie then moved northeast into Port Charlotte. Hurricane Ian, however, was a Category 5 storm. It had winds of up to 160 miles per hour, and as many of you know by now, the eye of Hurricane Ian crossed right over Sanibel with these homes and condos along Gulf Drive, seeing the worst of the damage. And if you're unaware, the eye of a hurricane is the strongest part of the storm, as it's the part of the storm that sees the strongest winds and rain. Anyway, Hurricane Ian also brought a storm surge as high as 15 feet and rain of over 20 inches in some spots.
From what I have heard, it's the second largest hurricane and the second most expensive hurricane, and even adjusting for cost of living when they take that into account ever. We did have a hurricane in 2004 before we lived there, Charlie, come through on the same exact path, and they had predicted as this one, it came through the Gulf, came over the islands, it was paralleling the peninsula of Florida. And that one was predicted to go to Tampa as well as Ian was. And it took that right turn and almost identical paths. And the ecosystem of all Florida, of Sanibel and Fort Myers and Pine Island Sound has been changed. It'll come back, but it's going to take years. That one created new inlets. It actually wiped out some passes and created some new ones. This one did the same. Someone had told me that because of when it parallels the land like that, when it gets close to large bodies of water, and the two large bodies of water it affected this were Charlotte Harbor and Tampa Bay. And as I'm sure you've heard, is the water, people that saw it, the waters were all just sucked out of Tampa Bay and out of our Charlotte Harbor into the Atlantic where the hurricane was, and that created this turn that made it kind of turn into the Sanibel area. I guess when it's out a little further, if it's coming more directly from, say, the Texas side of it doesn't make that turn. But yeah, we were fortunate that we haven't had on Sanibel, from what records show, a catastrophic hurricane like this, devastating hurricane in over 100 years.
So now let's talk about how Sanibel is unique from other coastal areas in Florida.
Sanibel is a sanctuary. 65% of all of Sanibel is in either wildlife refuge, national wildlife refuges, Ding Darling. But there's also many tracts that have been set aside by environmentalists and people who've purchased land and put it into wildlife status. So 65% of the island was affected. That is in the wildlife refuges or whatever else. And in a way, it was a good thing. If you can think, if that were, say, Marco or some of the islands that are just so heavily populated and densely populated with humans and concrete and whatever else, how much more damage that would have been. The island absorbed a lot of the damage. And covered, but the natural beauty of the island's been marred. It'll come back. They always do, but it took a pretty big punch.
So what Mike is saying is that because most of Sanibel Island has been protected from overdevelopment, there isn't as much concrete on Sanibel as there is on an island like Marco further south, where essentially that entire island is developed. When there's more of a natural landscape rather than a man-made one on Sanibel, for example, here there's more marshes, wetlands, and trees, even though the ecosystem got hit pretty hard, in the end, the island was able to absorb a good portion of the storm, whereas man-made structures will fall apart, and having too much concrete leads to more severe flooding and storm surges. Not just Fort Myers, but you head north of there, you go through, Sarasota, Anna Maria Island, all that, and up even further up north Clearwater. Not all of that is full of high rises, but there's a lot of development there. And I spent a lot of time there when I was down in Florida. And, some of those keys like Longboat Key and, what am I thinking of? Lido Key. Yeah. Some of them I thought were pretty well managed with the development, but others, it's just high rise after high rise, like what you were talking about, concrete jungle. And down to Sanibel, I thought it was actually kind of a nice change of scenery with, with having less development.
Yeah, and that's what it's known for. And I'm over here in Vero Beach, and kind of the same thing on this coast on Vero Beach is that they don't allow anything over 3 stories. What's going to happen on Sanibel is a lot of those people that say retired in the early 90s, and they retired and they bought back then a home that was very expensive, but in the early 90s or late 80s was $250,000 for example. It's going to cost, and they're retirees, they're now maybe in their 70s or 80s, and their little bell curve of their retirement assets is getting down towards the end. They're getting quotes insurance hasn't covered. We're having difficulty with our flood insurance carriers. And they get quotes that, hey, it's going to cost you, $500,000 to restore your home because your home, you bought it for $250,000, but it's worth $2 million now. And they can't do it. And these poor people are stuck. They're going to have to sell. I get texts every day. How they got my number, I don't know, probably through tax records, that offering to buy my house cash. They're trying to buy them all on the cheap and then, wait for the time to come and then resell them. So there's some opportunists out there. My heart goes out to these elderly Sanibelians that are stuck. I'm not sure if you're aware or saw that when you were driving down West Gulf Drive. Every single one of those condominiums, there's not been a new condominium complex built for 30, 40 years in my knowledge, but a lot of them are built in the 70s. A lot of them are still without power or water because there's so much damage they can't really turn it on until they get they're still remediating damage. Those poor people are without living quarters. A lot of those were in the rental programs for vacation people. And so these people that were maybe had 2 or 3 units over there that were being rented out at, let's say, the Sundial or Causeway are without an income. The value of the condos is plummeting, and they're between a rock and a hard place. What are they going to do? They're not going to open some of those units up for a couple of years, and then they'll be forced to either hang on to them, pay these huge assessments. The Sundial, for example, their first assessment per owner, per condo over there was in the neighborhood of $25,000 just for remediating the debris and getting all that gunk out of the first level.
A lot of what Mike is talking about now is the logistics that go on behind the scenes when it comes to each individual property owner. Each owner has to work with their insurance that they put their home through, and at times, that can be a headache and a very long process. Under some circumstances, insurance companies want people to wait until they can get out there to assess the damage before cleanup begins. He was mentioning earlier about how some of the island's residents are retirees who bought their Sanibel homes in the 90s when the home prices were a third of what they are now, generally speaking, only to have their home values rise significantly. And unfortunately, the price for some people to rebuild who might not have the best insurance is not anything that they can afford, since they retired maybe in their 50s, so their stockpile, so to speak, has largely been used up at this point in their lives. Another big issue for any region going through disaster relief is dealing with annoying scammers or investors who try to talk them into making a bad decision on impulse when they're vulnerable from the storm, not to mention thieves who will come by and steal anything that they see of value.
But the great thing about Sanibel is, Sanibel is unique because it's in Lee County, but it's also I'm not sure, you can look up the dates. They basically seceded from Lee County and became their own governing board. And we govern our own island. We have our own, with it, that has its pros and cons, but we're not really part of. Captiva still is, and Fort Myers is, and Fort Myers Beach, and down to, I'm not sure how far Lee goes down, maybe into Estero, maybe part of Bonita. They are governed by Lee County and Lee County sheriffs and everything else. Sanibel is its own governing board, its own governance.
So this was mostly motivated by the population control, so to speak, that Mike and I have been talking about with Sanibel, because back in 1976, residents of Sanibel saw what was happening around all of Florida's coastal cities, and they didn't want the overcrowding and overdevelopment to happen on Sanibel, so they joined together to form what is known as the Sanibel Plan. The plan's main goal has always been to protect the environmental resources on the island and to keep the population density down. Sanibel Island is approximately 18 square miles, and today the city of Sanibel takes up the entire island. So it's all owned by Sanibel City, which was established in 1974. With that said, as much as 2/3 of the island is designated as conservation land. The Sanibel Plan is still in use today, however it's been revised many times over the years.
And they're much more strict environmentally. They're much more strict in terms of how you can rebuild these homes, and that's what we're going to be running into on Sanibel, is with with them having their own governing board. We're running into issues with them being they're still governing, like, every single home on that island has to be rebuilt or restructured, or have the lower level redone or something. And it was okay when they had 1 or 2 building permits coming through. They're not changing anything. They're not bringing any more people in to help with permitting or anything, and they're still trying to do it in terms of what was. And this was the biggest disaster that could ever be bestowed on any community, except for maybe a nuclear bomb, because as you saw, it looks like a bomb went off.
Yeah.
We're running into problems, in my personal opinion, on the island, with them being a little bit obstinate in how they're trying to help us out. And they're worried about percentages of planning being done of native versus non-native, and elevations and this and that. And I think they need to loosen up a little bit of things here for a little while, just to help us get back on our feet, because everybody's running into a lot of costs. There's about 3 or 4 impactful things that are going to happen to a lot of people rebuilding. One, Sanibel is, as we said earlier, it's a special place. We've disallowed heavy development just to keep the population density down and preserve the ecosystem and the balance between nature and the people that live there. With that comes some pretty strict building codes. Sometimes I think that they're a little bit over the top, and we're okay when we had 1 or 2 houses that were being remodeled or 1 or 2 houses being built. Now we have every single resident needing to have some form of repair or rebuilding or revegetating, landscaping, whatever else. And the city is doing the best job they can, but they need to adapt, and they need to maybe change a little bit of what their previous mindset was, and not be, I call it pre-Ian and post-Ian, basically, because the world is, in our little world in Sanibel, everything's considered you're either pre-Ian or post-Ian where you're at. And they've got to help out a lot of the residents that are, not getting any insurance coverage by being a little bit more lenient in terms of allowing us to get back on our feet. And you can do a little research on that or I can guide you towards that with what the city government has put in place that are a little bit restrictive of what we're doing. And that's one other thing too that's going on with Sanibel is a lot of people that are, as I said, older community on Sanibel, because they don't let any high-rise buildings. You can't have anything over 3 stories. They saw Marco Island and Fort Myers Beach way back in the day being overdeveloped, and a lot of the natural beauty of it being turned into a concrete jungle. And they made sure that would not happen to Sanibel.
Basically, the Sanibel Plan has been the guiding force behind all development that has occurred since 1976. When the plan was drawn up, Sanibel departed from the zoning and development standards that the rest of Lee County had in place. If the Sanibel Plan were never to have happened, then there would have been about 30,000 residential units on the island. Today, Sanibel's limit on the total number of residential dwellings is at 9,000 units, which includes everything from hotel rooms to single-family homes. Hence, why you don't see large hotel chains on the island. Airbnb must be huge here. The Sanibel Plan, when it was written, recognized that unlimited future population growth would be hazardous to the health, safety, and welfare of the public. The plan continued to say that limiting development was crucial for adequate delivery of services and natural resource protection. The federal government owns 8 square miles of the 18 total square miles of the land that makes up the island. Those 8 square miles being the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge, mostly just referred to as Darling. You can see the refuge in the background behind Blind Pass Beach. Unfortunately, the federal law doesn't allow for drones to be flown over National Wildlife Refuge land or national parks, so we'll have to settle for this. Still not a bad view, though. Anyway, the Darling National Wildlife Refuge is named after the cartoonist J. Norwood Darling, who had the nickname of Ding. Darling often drew up political cartoons and newspapers that supported the conservation movement. Darling even earned himself a blue ribbon from then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt for his efforts of advocating strongly for wildlife. With that said, both Hurricane Ian and Charley from 2004 has caused long-term damage to the wildlife preserve. Much of the wildlife preserve is supposed to be freshwater, but the storms over the years have pushed salt water into the freshwater areas, and that has killed off some of the wildlife that has relied on the fresh water. Some of the animals within the Darling National Wildlife Refuge have been tagged as a part of research, and one story says that after Hurricane Ian came through, there was a tagged box turtle that was found all the way across the water in Cape Coral after the storm. I remember a conversation that I had briefly with a tourist on the island who said that he talked to somebody the day before I came through and said that that person was a business owner on the island who owned a seashell store. And she said that she lost everything that she worked up for about 40 years. It's a very sad thing to see all of this devastation, all of this hurricane damage, and just knowing how many people this affected. It's tough to put into words because you know that there's nothing that you could say or do that would help anything. All you can do is give your sympathy through words and just hope that things get better and that the entire community and everyone that is contracted to work on all of these buildings to rebuild does a great job doing so, and hopefully the next time that the Sanibel area sees a hurricane, hopefully the newer structures can withstand stronger winds. Anyway, here is more of my conversation with Mike Cluth, who once again is a homeowner on the island.
My neighbor, he rode the storm out. And and he moved off of our street. He has a first level house, and he's a retired orthopedic exec from East Coast. He went to a friend's house that is on West Gulf. Did you guys drive around Sanibel at all? Did you go over to West
I
Gulf?
did. I did. I don't remember names of everything, but I saw pretty much the whole island.
Yeah. So when you were over on the west side by the ocean, all those condos and all the big, huge houses, he rode the storm out over there, which that area got devastated. And the lower level, when the storm surge came in, it came in within like 15 minutes. It went from nothing to 6 to whatever, how many feet. Our street got about 5.5 feet. And the whole island was washed over, as you know. And that area got like about 11 feet. And the house he was staying in, the lower garage doors, which are hurricane proof, and a lot of the houses have what they call blowout walls. They're an actual whole section of a wall that if the hurricane gets so much force in there, if water does get in there, the whole wall just blows out and lets everything out. So the house won't. His walls all blew out. The roof came off in part of the house he was in, and it was. I mean, he was lucky to live through it. It's almost like a lot of people that went through it have almost like post-traumatic stress syndrome, because it was one of the biggest hurricanes ever. I think it's the second biggest hurricane ever to hit the States. There's a lot of people like on our street where you saw all those places that were torn down. There used to be restaurants like where the Lazy Flamingo was, and the Sunset Grill, and the Island Store. Across the street from that was the Mad Hatter. But that was our neighborhood. We would walk down there and have dinner at the Lazy Flamingo probably every third night, or the Sunset Grill. The Mad Hatter across the way was a little restaurant right on the beach that was very famous. It was a Condé Nast top 100 restaurant. And it probably only sat like 12 people, 16, 18 people maybe. Little bitty thing on the beach, but just amazing food. And you got to know everybody by name, all the waiters and stuff, and the little general store. And everybody's lost that little piece. They're not coming back. These people aren't rebuilding. It's too expensive to rebuild the way that Sanibel's making us rebuild. And so a lot of people are just kind of either financially strapped. They're tired of dealing with insurance companies. They're tired of people coming through.
We got about 6 minutes left on this Zoom thing. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about your experiences with the hurricane?
I guess the emotions of the hurricane are almost like losing a death in the family or losing a loved one. We were fortunate. We're very blessed. Our main level was fine. Our lower level, which was meant to, be hurricane sustainable, was, under 6 foot of water. So we've had to just rip out everything and put back in, the drywall or whatever else. But the feelings of what the hurricane and going through it and watching it on TV, knowing that that's part of your life, and just not being able to sleep the night before the hurricane hits the shore. And as I said, I went to work that morning and I just knew when they were showing it going on land, and that the eye of the hurricane was directly over our house. Right. We're right by Blind Pass. It's gut wrenching. It's not ending, and then having to wait for a few days until a satellite goes over to show you what was left of the island. Seeing what the devastation afterwards, it felt like a death in the family, a death of a loved one, and my heart went out to just the island. We're fortunate enough and blessed enough that financially we can sustain something like this and rebuild. We're young enough. The people, as I said earlier, that aren't in that category, that have to now leave their home or sell. It's heartbreaking. It's heart wrenching. And it's all part, there's nothing you do about it. It's just it's Mother Nature. It's a natural disaster. But it is, and I'm glad you're doing a story on this, because we've been kind of forgotten about. They made the national news for a few days, but it's not part of the narrative of the media right now. So off they went, and we're there left picking up the pieces. Everybody's pulling together. We all love the island. Every single person you talk to, we play pickleball with a whole big group of people there every day. Everybody's just kind of just pitching in. We're all kind of doing our thing. How you doing? How you hanging in there? People are checking in on each other, checking on their mental health. Someone's stressed out. I have a good friend on the island. We do that. She puts out, basically posts all the time saying, does anybody need any help today? I can come over and help you out. And people are doing that, which is nice. It shows the best in people. And it also shows, and it happens, throughout ages of how we all pull together as Americans. But we're kind of left on your own too, because of Sanibel has a lot of people on there that have the ability to withstand it. They're on their own financially. We've been kind of left out there by ourselves versus having the government come in and do what the government does. They've kind of said, FEMA's been great. They've been there helping out in terms of cleanup. To my knowledge, that's about it. That's about ending as well. So then we're just going to have to rebuild this island, get it back to its beauty, build back the businesses. They need help the most. All these people that have a business that haven't had an income for 6 months right now, those people still need help.
I think what Mike is referring to there is that he's saying that there's a stereotype and a perception of everyone who lives on the island, because if you live on the island, then you must be this wealthy person, right, to be able to afford some of these homes. But that's not necessarily the case. Just like with all stereotypes, there are some people who live here year round on the island and make a living off of their small business, and they don't necessarily live right up on the water like all of these expensive homes that you're seeing here in Captiva. What Mike is saying is that they're being overlooked and that they still need help. Anyway, lastly, Mike talks about the charitable contributions that have been made on the island.
We've been trying to, everybody in the island is trying to pitch in any way they can, either through CROW, which is our wildlife rehabilitation clinic. It's an amazing cause. At the rec center, but there's actually one that we're not going to be there on the 23rd, I think, of this month, or 22nd, where, a volunteer day. A lot of people are pitching in, picking up debris that, we've been doing that along the roadways. We go out and, pick up a lot of debris. It's endless, as you saw. So, it's almost like, fighting against the tides of time on that one. But everybody's kind of pitching in because there's only so much you can right now anyway. There's not a lot of other activity.
Well, it was great having Mike Cluth on for this video, as he provided some great insight while thoroughly explaining his own personal experiences with the hurricane, and I wish both him and his family well, along with everyone else on Sanibel who is dealing with the ongoing cleanup efforts, whether they know someone who lives on the island, it's a family member or a friend. It's just a terrible thing to have to experience. Well, some final facts about Hurricane Ian is that before it hit Florida, some might forget that it hit the far western end of Cuba as it made its way north through the Gulf of Mexico. Most sources claim that Hurricane Ian caused over $112 billion in damage in the United States, making it the costliest hurricane to ever hit Florida. The storm caused over 150 deaths, and it had winds of up to 150 miles per hour as it hit Sanibel, after seeing winds as high as 160 miles per hour over the ocean. So at its peak, Hurricane Ian was a Category 5. However, when it made landfall in Florida, it downgraded to a high-end Category 4. Once again, the storm surge in Sanibel was as high as 13 feet. More than two of me. I'm 6'5", so two of me would be just under 13 feet. However, in nearby Fort Myers Beach, the surge rose to 15 feet above the ground. So with that said, drowning was the biggest contributor to the overall death toll. Once again, I'll have a separate video uploaded on my second channel where you'll be able to see one long continuous drive as I made my way through the island. That drive will also be interrupted by drone shots as I'll show you everything that I was able to capture. That video is going to be over an hour long, but if you're curious and you want to see what more areas of the island look like after the storm, then make sure to check out my second video once I have that uploaded, and the link for that will be down below. Once again, if you found this video informative or helpful, or if you appreciated the efforts that went into this video, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as doing all of those things helps these videos destroy the evil monster that is the YouTube algorithm. Also, make sure to hit that notification bell and select yes, so that you can be notified every time that I upload a new video. Also, if you want to see more places like what you saw here, you can check out my Florida playlist, which will be linked down below. And last but not least, if you can't get enough of me on here, you can also go follow me on my other social media accounts. Those links are also below. We'll see you next time, and here's to wishing you a great recovery if you're affected by Hurricane Ian, whether you're on Sanibel or anywhere along its path.